Growing sweet corn in Kentucky. First off, a little corn history. Corn is actually a man-made plant, believe it or not. It would not exist in its own current form if it wasn't for man. People living in Mexico began planting corn at least 7,000 years ago, and it began as a plant called teosinte that didn't have kernels spaced closer together on a cob like what we have today. It looked more like a large grass, like maybe even a fescue with a few kernels at the top of the stem. Pollen beneath Mexico City has even found pollen from the prehistoric corn that's at least 80,000 years old. It eventually spread throughout the Western Hemisphere as a food staple as well. Seed saving from corn planted throughout the West caused a great variety of corn types to develop, and improvements have came about to this day because of hybridization, selection of variety or selection for characteristics, and also even modern day genetic modification has added a lot more diversity to corn. Corn is one of the native people's original food crops. It's also known as the Three Sisters. The Three Sisters being corn, beans, and squash. Flint corn tends to have a larger grain with relatively little flour tissue in the endosperm, whereas flour corn is soft and floury and breaks apart readily. Dent corn is just a cross between flint and flour corn, and its characteristics include a floury portion in the middle of the endosperm, extending upward and widening over the grain, and a corneous part that extends around the middle of the endosperm, which is not that most of us really care about, but it's just kind of how the characteristics of the different types of corn and how the seed makeup is determines what we use it for. And then shrinkage of the floury part plus the non-shrinkage of the corneous part produce the characteristic dent in the dent corn, which is field corn. If you were to go out and look at field corn when it's dried down now, it'll have a little dent in the top of the kernel, and that's from that floury part, which is shrinking down when it dries. There are over 4,200 products corn is used for. There's a link here if anybody would like to go check that out. That's more of some of the like 30 or 40 common products, but you'll even be surprised at some of the common products that corn is in. Just looking at it and glancing over it earlier, they're making rubber now with corn. It's even in batteries. A lot of different products you wouldn't think that corn would be in, they are using it in, including, which I thought was funny they didn't put it on the list, was cornflakes. Farmers today produce about 70% more corn per pound of fertilizer applied than they did in 1970. That's due basically from hybridization and then genetic modification. In 2019, farmers produced 500% more corn than in 1936 on less acreage. So that's really shows you what hybridization and fertilization can do for the yield of this crop. Production per acre has doubled in 20 years with no additional inputs. So again, that's probably genetic modification, but you know, it really has increased the amount of corn that can be produced per acre. From 1866 to 1936, we averaged anywhere from 20 to 30 bushels of corn that whole time per acre, and now we are averaging 180 to 200 bushels an acre as a country. So that's a lot more corn in a smaller area. The U.S. corn crop is worth about $61 billion. The U.S. is also the largest producer of corn in the world. We produce about 20% of the world total. And the U.S. grows only 260,000 acres of sweet corn out of the 90 million acres of total corn that we actually grow. And if you think about it, the reason being is that 260,000 acres of sweet corn is pretty much only being consumed by people, whereas the 90 million acres of corn are being used for a myriad of products, animal feeds, ethanol, a lot of other things that it's being used for. Site selection and preparation. Corn needs at least 6 hours of full sun a day. It is a full sun plant. We're going to talk about soil, access, air drainage, proximity to trees and shrubs in the coming slides. First off, the access, you want it near the house. That's going to be easy to get to when you're harvesting. It's also going to be accessible for weeding, for cultivating, maybe even pushing the plants back up if they need a little help if we have a windstorm, but usually corn will get itself back up if it's not too far along in the process of producing an ear. Definitely want it close to water because you've got to water this product if it's close to filling out because you want to get a good ear of corn. Also, close to the house will help deter some of the vermin, which includes deer and raccoon that might want to eat your corn. As far as air drainage, it's not a huge different or a huge problem for corn because we plant it after danger of frost. But low-lying areas are subject to unseasonable frost, but definitely even waterlogged soils. Corn does not want to sit in water. A south-facing slope warms a little quicker and will give you better germination, especially if you're planting in the spring. And then protected sites with reasonably good airflow is best. If you can protect them from those thunderstorm winds, that's great. That's gonna help your corn stand up. Although corn, like I said earlier, does usually stand back up at least partially if flattened by a windstorm. And then airflow just helps dry your foliage and helps control diseases, even though we don't really have that much disease problems here with corn because most of our corn is resistant to most of the diseases. You want to make sure that you keep your corn away from unwanted shade. That's going to be a problem. Also, competition for water and nutrients if the trees and shrubs are too close. Juglone toxicity is a real problem with corn. And you can see here, this is a walnut tree with walnuts on it. Walnuts, the roots, the leaves, the nuts, everything has juglone in it, which is a plant growth regulator and it reduces growth of plants. It's a mechanism that the walnut tree has developed to keep competition away, and it will greatly reduce the corn growth, or even if not straight out kill it. So you want to stay away from walnut trees. You also want to site the garden at least 10 feet from any of these trees and shrubs, even just trees and shrubs in general. And I'm saying 10 feet from the drip line, not 10 feet from the trunk, because those tree roots will really creep in there if you're watering your corn and you're fertilizing that area. Also, you want to make sure that you can keep your corn away from birds. Some years birds will come in and really eat corn. Some years it won't. It just depends on the timing of it. And if you have a migrating flock coming through. One year I had a flock of red-winged blackbirds come in and just decimate my sweet corn. 1 out of 30 years growing corn. That's not bad, but it is something that can happen. So just keep that in mind. Weed control is very important. Weeds will compete with plants for sunlight, water, nutrients, and space. You want to reduce your perennial weeds before planting, and how do you reduce those? Or you can cellularize them with clear plastic, which is basically just cooking them under that clear plastic with that sun shining through so it'll get really hot. Other ways are herbicides. You can do Roundup to kill the weeds and then till them under, or you can till them under and hope that that will kill them out. You can also use 2,4-D to kill those weeds if they are broadleaf weeds. Keep in mind, I would never recommend 2,4-D in any of your vegetable gardens because mainly it is a little bit persistent, more persistent than glyphosate is, and it can damage other crops such as beans. So you can see in this picture here, the corn and the beans are really close together. I would never have put 2,4-D on that side where the corn is because I've been afraid that it might run over to the beans. It also can volatilize, so I just put it in there as an option. A lot of the old corn ground used to field corn ground, especially was used atrazine was used in it, and it was to kill broadleaf weeds. And when they followed soybeans in it, the next year, some years there was some damage, so you can see how it really persists in the soil. You can also put preen down after your corn has germinated, and that will stop like the other smaller weeded or seeds of weeds to germinate, such as crabgrass and those kinds of things, which is a great help sometimes if you're in an area where you know that's going to be a problem. And also, you're going to till and hoe regularly to keep annual weeds under control. Usually, when my corn gets about knee high to waist high, there you can see that's probably close to waist high. That's when I would turn it loose and it's on its own. I don't want to get the soil loose around that corn at that point because when it grows up and starts to tassel, it's going to if we have a lot of wind, it could blow over easier if that ground's loose. So you want that soil to kind of compact back around the plant a little bit. And by this point, they're going to outgrow any weeds that might try to come into the bed. Your soil, you want well drained soil. If you've got clay soil, you're going to definitely add organic matter. Raised beds are an option. I've not really done corn in raised beds, but it's always an option if you don't need a lot of corn. You're going to work your soil down to 6 to 7 inches, and then you're going to remove any large stones, clods, plant debris, that kind of thing. I included this picture here from the internet just because I thought it was funny. He had clay soil and he had that little corn, and then he added organic matter, and you can see he has good soil now. and he has corn over his hand, even raised up over his head. Definitely want to get a soil test. It's very important to do that at least once every 3 years. The fall before you plant is great. The spring's fine. We're getting a little later now that we're up close to planting time or right at planting time. If you do it now, you're still going to have to wait 2 weeks. Probably we're still in a great window to plant corn in 2 weeks from now. It's mid-May. It's fine. But I would definitely go ahead and get one done if you haven't done one in the last 3 years. When you get the sample to send in, you want to go down 6 to 7 inches deep in 5 areas or so of the garden. Mix those together, randomly pick those sites, mix those together, let it dry for a day or two, and then bring it in. We'll put it in a bag and we'll send it up to the university, to the lab. It's free, so if you want to do more than one or several soil tests in several spots, that's great too. The pH for corn should be around 6.0 to 6.8, and then we're also going to test for phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen. We won't test for organic matter unless you ask for it, but that's going to cost you a few dollars because that's not part of the free soil testing that we do. Other things that you can do to improve your soil is compost, compost, compost. Plants love it. It's a great thing to have. If you've got it, definitely apply it. It will improve your water retention or promote your soil structure, increases fertility, increases your cation exchange capacity, which basically is the amount of nutrients that your soil can hold that is available to your plants. So if you can increase that, the capacity for that, the plants are going to have more access to nutrients. It also will reduce your fertilization requirements by up to 50%, believe it or not. And it will enhance your microbial activity, which will suppress pathogens and also accelerate the breakdown of pesticides and other maybe synthetic compounds that might have been in your soil that you didn't even know it, such as maybe a herbicide that was applied the year before or at some point. Corn is a warm season crop. This is very important. It will not germinate well and may rot in the soil if it's not 60 degrees or above. So that's the soil temperature. As of taping this, it's April the 29th, 2021. I did check the soil temperature right now. It's 64 degrees. So we're in that window if you wanted to plant. I know but not all years are we going to be that way, but that's just to let you know, because someone asked earlier about what the soil temperature was this time of year. You can actually log on to the Mesonet sites, and you can actually look up your soil temperature for your particular area. As far as planting, you want to purchase new seed yearly. Sweet corn does not keep from year to year as well as a lot of other seeds do. If you've got old seed corn, though, I'd definitely go ahead and do a germination test. And if you're wondering how to do that, go back on our YouTube site or onto our website, and the links of all the YouTube videos are on there. And I've actually done a video on how to do a germination test for your seeds at home. You want to plant your kernels about 1 inch deep in well-tilled soil. The rows should be 3 feet apart with plants 9 to 12 inches apart. I like to put them the 9 to 12 because I like to get a larger ear. If you give a little space, you get a bigger ear than if they're on top of each other or really close. You may also plant in heels if you prefer that method. You want to start with 5 to 6 seeds per heel, and then thin it to 3 per heel, and then space your heels 3 feet apart. As far as direct seeding, you want to plant your seed twice as deep as the seed is wide. That's the general rule for all seeds. So that's not just for sweet corn, that's for all seeds, something to keep in mind there. And you want to keep your seed moist until the plants germinate. Ideally, when I plant my sweet corn, I would like to go into a moist soil, cover the seed, and maybe even get 3 or 4 dry days with no rain after that. It seems the corn germinates pretty quickly in that loose, moist, but not wet soil. And also that keep your soil from, if you've got clay, which most of us do around here, from crusting over if we have a heavy rain and maybe causing those plants not to germinate as well. This works also really well with beans for me. If you want to know how much you should plant, there's a link here for one of the pubs at UK. This is a vegetable gardening pub for homeowners. It has a few charts on it that are very interesting and something you may be interested in. And it basically just tells you how many feet of row to plant based on how many people's in your family, and how much to plant if you want to have some to freeze or can. And not just for sweet corn, but a lot of the other crops as well. As far as fertilizing, before planting, obviously you want to get a soil test. We talked about that. If you don't get a soil test and you don't want to do a soil test, Our general rule is to apply about 2 pounds of actual nitrogen or 20 pounds of triple 10 per 1,000 square feet before planting. And then you want to side dress with a 1/4 pound of urea, which is just nitrogen, per 25 feet of row when the corn is about knee high. That little extra nitrogen there on your corn when it's knee high will really boost it up and help you get a nicer crop. As far as variety selection, you want to think about a few things. Size of mature plant, not a huge deal. Most of our modern sweet corns are going to go about 6 to 8 feet tall. Days to harvest is important. We'll talk about that just in a minute, the reason that's important. Heirlooms, disease resistant, and then saving seeds, which you're not going to save seed out of these. They're hybrids. You're not going to get the same thing back, and you're not going to even let them go to maturity to get seed. So that's something we're just not going to do because these are hybrids and you won't get anything back like what you're planting. In central Kentucky, we have about 150 to 160 frost-free days most years. Some years we may even go to 200. It just depends on the year. We are in zone 6B, you can see there. We went from 6 to 6B a few years ago. We're going to be reevaluated this year because they do it by decades and they'll drop a decade off. So I think the 90s will drop off of this one, or the 80s, and I'm not sure which one it is, 20 or 30 years back. But anyway, we'll drop 10 years off. So we're probably going to go to 7. I think the Arbor Day Foundation's already put us at 7. But anyway, our average last frost is usually anyway from April 30th to May 5th. I think April 28th is our most years are what we consider our last frost. But as you know, we can even have a freeze up into May. We had one last year, I think the first day of May. Planting date for fall crops should be counted backward from the average date of your first frost. So if you're wanting a late corn crop, you need to count back from our average frost date. Let's just say it's October the 15th. You need to count your days back into summer and when to plant if you want to do that. But you do need to add some extra days for your cool nights and your shorter days. I don't really recommend a late sweet corn planting. We'll talk about why, because there's a few pests that are going to be almost impossible to control on sweet corn late in the season. As far as planting dates for different vegetable crops, not just sweet corn, the same pub again, I put it in here. This is ID 128. This is the vegetable gardening pub for home gardens from UK. Your variety selection, old-fashioned varieties are not very sweet. This is shoe-peg corn here. It's one of the older sweet corn varieties. It's not very sweet. I guess it's better than field corn, but in my opinion, it's not a whole lot better. It was selected for most of the time they were selected for their flavor. And then these older varieties don't have any disease resistance. They're not uniform in appearance. They don't store well. And you can see on this one, shoe-peg corn, the kernels are not even really on the cob in rows like what we're really used to with our modern varieties. You want to select disease-resistant varieties if practical. That's really not a huge problem with sweet corn. Most of those new varieties are already resistant to just about most disease that we'll have here in Kentucky. I will say no one variety is resistant to all diseases, but they're resistant to most diseases that we're going to see here. Seed catalogs will indicate what varieties they are resistant to as well. Also, your seed packets will usually tell you that as well, or you can consult ID 128 for best varieties in Kentucky. But I'm going to tell you my favorite varieties and some of my best varieties. This is a short list here, but I will say Obsession is great, Honey Select's great, Ambrosia's great, Cup of Joe, gotta have it. I could probably go on, but any of those you will be happy with. I can add one that I grew last year for the first time to that list as well, and it was called Cindy, which is a yellow corn. Corn of all kinds will cross the first year. It's the only vegetable that will show you that it crossed the first year. Different types of sweet corn, popcorn, Indian corn, field corn, all of them can cross with unwanted results. You can see here that someone planted sweet corn and Indian corn too close together, and they tasseled at the same time, and you can see what a mess that made. So there's really nothing edible there. You're not going to get a good Indian corn, and you're not going to get an edible sweet corn there. So that's just a mess. So we've got to avoid getting cross-pollination with these different types. So what does it all mean? You're going to see these letters by your sweet corn you buy them. We have the Super Sweet or SH2. It has the highest sugar content with crisp kernels. Requires isolation of at least 500 feet from your normal sugar, sweet corn, and sugar enhanced or SE. We're going to talk about all these a little more. This is just to let you see that you're going to see a lot of different numbers or letters behind your sweet corns. These all do need to be isolated from field corn, Indian corn, and popcorn. First one is the normal sweet corn varieties, or SU. These are your regular sweet corn with old-fashioned corn flavor. Crisp kernels, keeping quality is not well. It has a small window of prime picking, so you have to make sure that you pick it at the right point to get the sweetest corn possible, or it will revert to starch pretty quick. These also need to be isolated from popcorn, field corn, Indian corn, and the other corns. Some examples of varieties of these are Isle Chief, Sundance, Country Gentleman, Silver Queen, which I know everyone's familiar with. That was the old standby for a while. Stowell's Evergreen, and then Honey and Cream. There's more of these, but these are just some that you've probably heard of. Then we have the Sugar Enhanced, which will have an SE behind it. These have tender kernels. It has a higher sugar content than normal sweet corn, which is the first one we talked about. And it does have better flavor when separated from other sweet corn, and it must be separated from all the other corns as well. Some examples of this one is Bodacious, which is a really good corn, especially if you hit it or pick it just right, as is Incredible there in the picture. Candy corn Silver King, I'm sure some of you are familiar with that one as well. Bialicious Ambrosia is a really good one too, and then Peaches and Cream. Then we have the super sweet, or SH2 type. These have 4 to 10 times the sugar content of normal SU types, and they can be stored up to 10 days and still have the quality. A lot of the older corns, if you stored them that long, they would convert to starch and not be sweet anymore. This requires higher germination temperatures, so it's one of those that you definitely want to make sure your soil temperature are up in the 60s, if not 70, when you plant. It also must be separated from all other corn types for best quality. So you want to make sure that this is tasseling only when the variety that you're planting is tasseling. Nothing else is even close by. So we've got Crispy King, Challenger, Passion, Jubilee, Jubilee Super Sweet, I'm sorry, Honey and Pearl. And then in the picture there is how sweet it is. I know that was very popular for several years around here. Then we have what is probably the new cream of the crop corns, I should say. Probably my favorite, all my favorite varieties, or most of my favorite varieties fall into this category. These are the triple sweets. These have a mixture of genes from 2 or 3 of the SH2, SC, or SU genes, which means we have the really sweet, extra sweet corn, the keeping time for extra sweet to stay sugar in the corn and not convert to starch. We also have that real old-fashioned corn flavor. So this gives you the best tasting corn possible, and basically is the best characteristics of all the different types of corn. This one also needs to be isolated from other corns, so just make sure that you've got it pollinated only whenever it's the only one tasseling out. Now it says if you cross-pollinate with SH2, SE, or SU, it won't affect the overall quality, but it could, and it might give you some different corn kernel colors in there if you're growing an all white or an all yellow variety. In this picture here is Obsession. It's a really great corn. If you find it or if you can order it, it's one that you can try. Also, we have Honey Select, which is a solid yellow variety, which is great. It is one that was given out at the class this morning. And then we have Avalon, Honey Treat, Pay Dirt, Montauk, and Serendipity. The new super sweets were a breakthrough in corn breeding, especially for commercial growers, because they actually do keep their sweet, like day of pick sweet, for at least 10 days in cold storage. Some disadvantages, though: they have poor germination, can have pollination problems if the weather's bad. I haven't had any issue with the pollination at all, but I do definitely plant whenever it warms up. Don't plant them too early. They have less drought tolerance, which, make sure you can be able to water them whenever the ear is filling out. And it does have some increased disease resistance. Some advantages are improved ear and kernel quality, high sugar content, sweet flavor, good corn flavor, and a capacity to hold its sweetness longer on the stalk and in the storage. So the window to pick this corn is much wider than it is with, say, the first sweet corns we talked about, which, like Silver Queen, they had just a few day window. This one right here has got about maybe 7 to 10 day window where you can pick it. It's still good. So how do you isolate? First, you can isolate physically by planting varieties at least 500 feet apart. That way the pollen is not going to fly that far. You want to separate your varieties by planting 14 days apart if possible. So if you want to plant more than one variety, or maybe you want to plant popcorn or some other kind of corn, You just make sure that you've got a 14-day difference from maturity dates or planting dates. So if you've got a corn that's got a 78 day harvest date, you want to make sure that you give yourself 2 weeks between planting a different variety. I may even do 3 weeks if I were you, to make sure that I've got plenty of time if they're going to be right beside each other in the garden. And you can separate by maturity date alone. That's not a problem. Most of us are not going to have land or a garden that we can plant 500 feet apart. So maturity date is what I do, and it's worked out quite well for me. I will say, to get good pollination though, and I should have mentioned this earlier, don't plant corn just in one straight row. If you got a 100-foot garden, say, and you see people plant one row of corn, you're not going to get good pollination that way. You need to plant in blocks. So instead of a 100-foot row, you should plant 10-foot rows in a block. That way you're going to get good pollination with that block of sweet corn. Remember, these are wind pollinated plants, so if they're a block in a block, they have much higher chance for that pollen getting where it needs to go. All varieties should be isolated from each other. Can't say that enough. And then cross-pollination between varieties, types, and sweet and field corn will reduce your quality. If you plant two types of sweet corn that should be planted together and they pollinate each other, what's going to happen is you're going to probably get a starchy, not sweet corn, and that's not what you want. Also, if they get pollinated by field corn, that's going to mess that up as well. And then you saw what happened with Indian corn. You get the miscolored sweet corn, which is also going to be starchy and not good to eat. So if you remember this, if nothing else in this entire PowerPoint, just know corn is the only vegetable that will cross and ruin quality this season. It's not like other vegetables where you'd have to save seeds out of something and plant it back, and then it's going to be messed up because the genetics mixed together. We're eating the seed, so that seed is this year's product, so that's going to be messed up for us. So just remember, you need to isolate your different varieties and your different types of corn. As far as crop rotation, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant are all members of the Solanaceae family. Beans and peas are the legumes. Cucumbers, melons, pumpkin, squash are all cucurbits. And then your radishes, your rutabagas, turnips, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, all of those are what we call cold crops. And then onions, garlic, leeks, and shallots, chives are all alliums or onions in the onion family there. And then you want to do crop rotations of at least 2 years are recommended. So you want to make sure that you can rotate these around in your garden. Even if it's just 20 feet from 20 feet, that can make a big difference because of soil-borne diseases. And corn can rotate with any of these because all those are broadleaves and corn is a grass. So it makes a good partner in your rotation with some of these. So why would you want to rotate your crops? Well, you get insect and disease management is a big deal. Also, weed management. Some crops grow at different times of year, and you got a crop out there, you're going to be managing those weeds. So if you've always got a warm season crop, you're probably letting cool season weeds go to seed, and you don't want to do that. So you want to rotate that around where you can have something in there at different times of the year on different years where you can keep those weeds under control. Also, nutrient demands. Plants like sweet corn are heavy feeders. You may want to come back in there with, say, beans the following year because beans will leave you nitrogen behind. So, you can help yourself out that way. Also, the benefits of the preceding crops can also improve your physical condition of your soil. Root crops are going to help loosen your soil. It's going to increase your microbial activity by switching plants because different microbes like different plants and different plant debris to feed on. And also some plants, believe it or not, can benefit because of the substances they secrete. Things like mustards and things can actually inhibit the growth of some organisms in the soil, which may be good depending on where you live. And maybe you've got something in your soil that they can control for you. Watering, you want to match your watering application to your plant needs, but generally 1 inch per week is going to be best, but it's also going to be based on your soil type, how much rainfall you've had, your crop requirements. Sweet corn, whenever it's tasseling and then filling out, it's going to need more water than it is if it's just a little 6-inch plant. That's where your growth stage is going to come in there. Experience and soil examination are your best measures. If you grow corn several years, you'll start figuring out when it needs water by your soil, the type of soil you have, where you live as well. And then sometimes the corn itself, if it starts to curl on the leaves in the afternoons, it's kind of telling you it probably needs a little more water. A rain gauge is a must for any vegetable grower, not just vegetable grower, any gardener. It's good to know how much water you've had in that garden in that week. And then don't base your watering necessarily on your crop appearance. Sometimes the corn could look okay, but if it's out when it's filling out, it will not fill out well, even though the plant may look okay. Soaker hoses are nice to have, but with sweet corn, it's almost like they need to be put down where the corn is small and left in place. But they do put the water where you want it, which is right at the root system, and also reduces your evaporation and doesn't get your soil or your soil doesn't get your leaves. I'm sorry, wet, which can increase your fungal pathogens and some diseases that might be out there. Mulching can also be beneficial when growing sweet corn. I don't generally put mulch down on my sweet corn because it's not out there that long, and usually it shades the soil when it starts to get a little taller. Uh, but organic mulch, if you've got it, especially if you've got a raised bed or something like that, straw, chopped leaves, wood chips, grass clippings, newspapers, all those are good things. You don't have to worry as much about grass clippings if you're going to put it on corn because if there's some 2,4-D left over from maybe somebody sprayed a yard or whatever, the corn's not going to it's not going to really affect the corn because the corn is a grass, so it's not as big a deal as it would be, say, if you're going to put it around tomatoes or something. Also, you can try black plastic. I've never done black plastic on corn, but you can see the picture there. They've got 2 rows. I probably, if I was doing sweet corn on plastic, I'd probably put a 3rd row down through there because you can plant it a little closer in a block that way. Some benefits of mulching are weed suppression. Obviously, that's a big benefit. Temperature moderation is also important. If you want to plant into black plastic, you could probably get by planting a little earlier because that would keep the soil warmer. Also, soil moisture moderation, which just keeps your soil from fluctuating from too wet to too dry, like it would if it was a bare. Also, as far as sanitation, it's good. It can keep some fruits and vegetables clean. Corn's probably not going to have that problem because it's going to be way off the ground. And then organic mulches are going to add organic matter too as they break down. Some of the pests that we're going to have out there, this is corn earworm. It is the primary pest. You can plant BT ready corn, believe it or not, which is actually makes its own Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a natural occurring bacteria which only kills caterpillars. You can also buy that as a spray if you don't want corn that already makes it, which it's probably harder to find that corn already makes it for a backyard grower than it would be a commercial grower. But if you want to spray that, it works great. It's organic. It doesn't affect us at all. It doesn't affect anything but caterpillars, but it's sold by a brand name Dipel. You can also spray with malathion or 7. You need to start your sprays for these whenever the plants start to tassel and the little ears start to form on the plant, and you'll see silk starting. That's where you want to make sure you target your sprays for these as well. I will say earlier planting reduces your earworm pressure. That's why earlier I said I didn't recommend a late planting because the later you plant corn, the higher chance you're going to have a lot of these corn earworms out there because their numbers go up exponentially as the summer goes along, and even with sprays you'll never be able to keep them all out. So just keep that in mind if you're wanting to try to do a late corn, that you're going to have to probably do something with a BT, and then you're probably still going to have a few in there because it's just the pressure is going to be too high. Then we have army worms. Some years these are bad. Most years they are not. Some years you'll just see a plant or two and you can spray and take care of it. But these can be a bad pest if it's a year that their numbers are really high. Uh, Most of the time it's just going to be a plant here and there, and you just spray that one plant. But to control these, you can also use Dipel with the BT, which is organic again, or 7, malathion, or even cyfluthrin. Cutworms are going to be a rare pest, but some years they can be bad, but usually it's going to be on a cool night. It's usually going to be an early spring pest. Hopefully by the time we get to mid-May and we don't have enough cool nights for them to really be a problem. But if you know you've had a problem, go ahead and target sprays around the base of the corn with cyfluthrin or 7. And then the next picture down is a European corn borer. Some years you'll have the corn borer and you'll have the corn earworm the same year, the same time. Most of us don't pay any attention, which is the difference. Doesn't make that huge difference to most of us. We just know that there's worms eating our corn. But if you want to know the difference, is the European corn borer there has a little black head on the worm, and the if you go back to up to the picture of the corn earworm, it doesn't. That's the main difference. And the corn borer will actually bore into the stalk and into the cob and stuff as well. It is also a significant pest. It also can be controlled with the dipel, which I talked about earlier, 7-malthion or cyfluthrin. Again, target your sprays right on that ear, right at the silks, and that way it'll run down the caw or the shuck and keep these corn borers out. Few pests you might find from some years. We have aphids. It's usually going to be on a younger plant, malthion, orthine, insecticidal soap. Even most years, you don't hardly ever see any aphids on corn, but it can happen. Grasshoppers can also be a periodical pest. Not that often, but sometimes you can see in the picture there they will attack corn and target that end where it's been eaten back, where they can get to the sweet corn under there. Malthion 7 and orthine are good choices there. Orthine is one I'd want to make sure that you check the label on how many days that you have to wait to eat, because it is systemic and it might be too far away that you can't even use it on corn that's close to being eaten. Another one is chickens. If you've got chickens running around out in your yard, a lot of times they'll take care of most of your grasshopper problems, or at least keep them under control where they're not going to be a huge problem on your corn. And then flea beetles, another one that can be a severe pest on small plants. Again, usually that's going to be a recurring pest in most gardens, most vegetable gardens, especially on young plants. And control those, again, 7 is going to be your easiest, cheapest way, cyfluthrin. And if you want to try organic, you can try the neem oil if you want to give that a shot. Few other pests that you might get, you got cucumber beetles there in the bottom right. Not very often, probably going to have those on your sweet corn, but it's possible. Then you have your leaf hopper on the left, which is a rare pest, but it could be a year where it's bad. The biggest one you're going to have there is your seed corn maggots. You can see there on that sweet corn. That is a spring pest on a lot of different plants and seeds. It's a little fly that lays eggs on when you plant a seed. Those little larvae hatch and they eat the corn. You'll also see these eating the stems of cabbages, eating onions, a lot of different things that they will attack. But this is the reason that a lot of sweet corn you buy is colored pink, because that pink actually is an insecticide and will kill these larvae before they have a chance to kill your seed corn. They also will attack beans. They're just a pest all around in the garden, especially if it's a garden going in to a new garden where there was grass last year. You're going to have a huge problem with these probably. But I've had problems with them for the last several years on cabbage and onions. So the sweet corn I haven't, because it becomes treated and I don't have to worry much about that. A bacterial wilt can also be a problem. I've seen this maybe one time in my lifetime. But the leaves show brown streaks, as you can see there. Early infection usually is stunting, wilting, and then finally death of the plant. Flea beetles actually vectored this disease, so if you start to get this disease, you probably have flea beetles out there moving this around, so it's time to control the flea beetles, which we talked about how to do that earlier. Also, you use resistant varieties. I think that's probably the reason I've only seen it once or twice in my life, because most of our new sweet corn varieties are resistant to most of these diseases. Then we have smut. You can see there at the top right, which is a fungus or gall. It can attack leaves, stems, ears, tassels. This shiny greenish white, nasty looking fungus. Believe it or not, in Mexico they actually do eat this stuff. I've never had it. I've even seen it canned, I think, down there from some TV shows. But anyway, if you see a plant that's got this, just take that plant out and destroy it and get it out of your garden. That way you won't have to worry about it spreading to other plants. You want to rotate or avoid plant injury and then destroy the plants if you see one out there. This is a very rare find. I've seen it maybe once in my life, twice at the most, on some sweet corn, but it's, when you do see it, it's kind of unnerving. And last, we have stunting disease, which is a yellowing mosaic on leaves, stunts plants. This is a virus which is vectored by aphids and leafhoppers. If you start to get this disease, make sure that you destroy the Johnson grass around your crop, and then again, plant your resistant varieties. As far as harvesting sweet corn is a short season. It turns to sugar. The sugars turn to starch pretty quickly, especially if you're not growing these new synergistic sweet corns, the triple sweets. You want to harvest early in the morning while the air temperature is cool and you know that it's got the maximum moisture in the plant or in the cob itself, or in the corn kernel, I should say. Corn harvest in the afternoon should be cooled immediately. I like to harvest early in the morning, get it in the shade, go ahead and shuck it and blanch it and cut it off and get it frozen that same day instead of trying to uh, keep it for a few days. Usually I'll pick it, how much I can do that day, and I'll do that for 2 or 3 days till I get it all done. Also, you can keep ears in the refrigerator, wrap them in a plastic bag, stick them in the crisper, and they'll keep up to 10 days in the crisper even, especially these new varieties, not the older varieties. The older varieties will turn to starch on you. These new varieties will keep and keep their sugar quality and content on there. Also, you want to make, just to give you an idea, if your corn is silking, you've got about 20 days from silking um, to harvest. And then you want to harvest when your silk turns brown. Um, I didn't put in here about some vermin control, but some ways to control deer and raccoons in this. Raccoons usually is going to be electric fence. You're going to put a wire down about 6 inches off the ground, another one about 10 inches, and another one about 16 or 17, maybe 18 inches. That way, you're just going to know that those raccoons are going to have to hit that wire to get into that garden. That way, you can shock them and run them out of there. The electric fence will also work pretty well with deer, unless the deer figure to jump it. If they don't have a lot to eat elsewhere, they might jump the fence. And if you do that, then you're going to do basically 2 wires. You're going to do one about 3 feet off the ground, and then you're going to come over 4 feet and put another one up maybe about 6. And they can't judge that depth, and then they won't jump it. And then also, always a good dog is going to be your best friend. If you've got one that will stay out there and run things off, that's going to be also a good option. Some people have tried radios to keep raccoons out, which usually doesn't work very long because they get used to it. And you can also trap raccoons in traps, and then you can take care of them that way. As far as other things that might get in there, I've seen fox eat sweet corn, believe it or not, but usually it's on ear a day. It's not something like raccoons where they just come in there and wipe it out. I've also seen turkeys come in after it's planted and it's starting to germinate and pluck it up out of the ground and eat the kernel off. Those are going to be a little harder to control. Again, electric fence is probably going to be a good option, even though they can fly over it. They're not likely to fly over it into that. Usually when they find the sweet corn, it's by accident. And once they find it, then they just pluck it out and eat it. If you have any questions, you can call me at the Washington County Extension Office at 859-336-7741. Happy gardening.